I wanted to start with a little bit of background on the state as a whole. You'll be hearing from several representatives from the state of Iowa today, so I just kind of wanted to give you a big picture. We received nearly $900 million in CDBG disaster assistance. In 2008, we received a declaration for 85 of our 99 counties. And we have a variety of infrastructure, housing, and economic development programs. For the economic development program specifically, we allocated $127 million in CDBG disaster assistance to these programs. We have 11 administrative entities throughout the state, and they're comprised of entitlement cities and councils of government. And we have a variety of economic development programs, 10 in total. So in order to assist you with the design of your economic development programs, I wanted to explain how our disaster event occurred. As you'll see, we have a variety of programs, but these programs were designed to meet our needs specifically, and our focus has always been to assess the needs and then to work with the CDBG disaster assistance to find a way to address those needs. So this is a picture of the city of Cedar Rapids, and this is the second largest city in the state of Iowa, and the most significantly impacted by the 2008 disaster. The majority of businesses in the Cedar Rapids area are located near the Cedar River. So this is downtown Cedar Rapids, right by the river. And further complicating the recovery process is, as you can see on the island they have their city hall located there. So the city's trying to recover, and they're also trying to help their citizens recover, which made it very difficult. And this is a picture post-disaster. The water covered 10 square miles of the city, 1,126 blocks. The city had little to no warning that the disaster was coming. 24 hours before the crest, the water rose 11 feet, which caught businesses off guard and didn't allow them time to prepare. So since they didn't know the flood waters were coming, they didn't have time to move their machinery and equipment and furniture, and that was all destroyed by the flood. At the end of it all, 943 businesses experienced overland flow. So as you can see, we have a variety of economic development programs. I'll touch on each of these, but you'll notice at the end of the presentation I've included a link to our website, and our website has our application and program guidelines, so if you want to get a better understanding of it, feel free to visit that. We have 10 programs in whole. Our first program that we had was called the Jumpstart Program. And the purpose of this program was to provide working capital assistance to businesses that received a loan approval. And in a sense, it was to jumpstart the economy. Later came the rest of our programs. We had a steam conversion, steam buy-down program, and this was developed to meet the needs of the city of Cedar Rapids. They had a steam plant that heated the majority of their downtown area, and that was completely destroyed in the disaster, so we assisted them with that. Also, as you saw, the majority of the businesses were right along the Cedar River, and so many of the tenants moved out of that area after the disaster. So we developed the Business Rental Assistance Program, which provided rental assistance to encourage those businesses to come back down to the Cedar Rapids area. We also had a commercial rental revenue gap, and then down at the bottom, the Residential Landlord Business Support Program, which helped landlords who lost tenants. We provided them with lost rental revenue for that vacancy period from the time of the disaster to a maximum of 1 year. We had 2 equipment programs, which provided assistance with business expenses related to machinery and equipment, furniture, supplies, and inventory. And we had a loan interest supplement program, which provided loan interest supplements on loans that were taken out after the disaster. And lastly, we had a relocation assistance program, which was also developed specifically for Cedar Rapids businesses that were participating in the buyout. This is a snapshot of where we are today. So you can see each of the programs, the number of businesses we've assisted, the total dollars awarded so far for these programs, and the average program award per business. And this is helpful because if you, whatever your allocation size may be, you can use this to see, maybe that's a program that would work within our budget. So it's a tool for you to use. So I wanted to highlight a few programs for you and point out some of the benefits to implementing these programs. I chose these programs because they can be funded at a variety of levels. So as I mentioned before, it's important to establish programs that meet the needs of your area. These worked for us, but it was because of how the disaster came. Cedar Rapids had very little time to prepare, and the Business Rental Assistance Program helped the businesses to come back into that area, and the Equipment Program helped to meet the needs of businesses that lost their equipment because they had little time to prepare. The equipment programs worked well at a variety of funding levels. Equipment ranked second only to construction in the amount of loss experienced by businesses, and we avoided construction activities mostly for our economic development programs because we wanted to avoid Davis-Bacon and triggering a higher level of environmental review. The program was initially capped at $50,000, but has since then been increased to $400,000. And the reason we started out at $50,000 is because we wanted to make sure we assisted as many businesses as possible and focused on those smaller businesses. But what ended up happening is the larger lost businesses proportionally were assisted with less assistance. The loan interest program is also a really great program. The majority of businesses will obtain a disaster loan after the disaster to help them recover. You can have an SBA loan, you could have just a private lender loan, and we provided interest supplements for the first 36 months of this loan. And the purpose of this program is so unique that there is not a single DOB with this program, which is a major plus. So what worked well? We kept the design simple in terms of program administration and documentation requirements. This is going to get very confusing the further you go in this process, so keep it simple up front. It's very beneficial for you. We designed programs to eliminate the need for significant underwriting. In a disaster, it's important to get funds out as soon as possible. So you need to keep the underwriting process simple so you can efficiently get the funds out the door. We didn't allow construction activities, as I mentioned, for a majority of the programs, thus avoiding Davis-Bacon requirements. Also, SBA provides structure assistance, so that would be a DOB for any construction activities you're doing. We offered a wide variety of programs in order to meet business needs. And just so you have some background, we didn't start with all these programs. We went out, we assessed our needs, and as we went on, we amended our action plan to adjust program caps, add new programs, so it was a work in progress, and still is, in fact. We used outsourced resources initially to establish program guidelines and documentation requirements. So we were given this, we had little guidance, and basically just had to go out on our own. We used the Division of Banking, for reference, Insurance Commissioner, the IRS, some accountants, in order to establish documentation requirements. And it's important to go to these experts because they know the documentation, and it helps you to prevent fraud in your program. So what didn't work so well? We found a few of those. Our first major one was when OIG came to audit us for I think it was the first or second time. We were informed by OIG that they considered $10.5 million of our program funds for Jumpstart to be misspent. This was plastered on the front page of our newspaper and picked up by several media outlets, and it's not a good way to start your programs. And what it came down to was one word. So the intent of our program was that applicants would receive a loan approval for Jumpstart, and we would assist them with 25% of that for working capital assistance. What we put in our rules is that they would have an executed loan document. So when OIG came in and they saw these loan approvals, they said, hey, you said executed here, so that's going to be $10.5 million that you owe back. The other thing that you can't ignore, and if you're not getting already, you will, is the political pressure. People are not familiar with the CDBG process, and they're notified that the state has lots of money, and they're wondering where that money is and why it's not in their pockets. So we had some issues with that. We fully believe that both our director and deputy director were fired as a result of the recovery process, and our division administrator has also been threatened or was threatened early on in the process. So there's definitely political pressure, and it's just good to be aware of that. So on to program implementation, what worked well. At the beginning of our business program release, we hosted a training session prior to releasing the programs and invited all the administrative entities in. This was beneficial. We went through the guidelines, the application, explained to them how these programs will work, provided them with checklists that they would need to go through before they submitted applications to us, and also provided DOB calculators to them so they would understand the DOB process. We conducted a pre-audit of all applications prior to dispersing funds. So how our process works is we have a web-based system where the administrative entities will submit an application essentially to us, and we will conduct what we call a pre-audit, where we have a checklist and we check several of the items to ensure the administrative entities are providing funds for the appropriate reasons. And this is important because the disaster recovery economic development programs, especially the ones we use, are unique. They're brand new to the administrative entities and difficult to understand. So we wanted to look at these up front, and we're able to do that with a 10-day turnaround. We do an eligibility review and a DOB review in 10 days, and then they're able to submit those applicants on a draw request and request the funds. So we've really honed in on it and come up with a pretty efficient process. We also developed a disbursement tracker to ensure applicants were not over-dispersed. And this is something very important to think of initially. If you're going to have applicants coming in on several draws or vouchers, it's important to ensure they're not receiving more than what they've been awarded. And this is not a sophisticated process. It's an Excel spreadsheet where we just have the business name, their award amount, and how much they've received to date, and we update it. So we really keep things simple, and I think it's made it a lot easier. Last but not least, we had the HUD Disaster Office expertise available to discuss the programs. Amanda has been with us from the beginning, and Mary Liz has recently joined us, but also the rest of the HUD Disaster Office. Disaster recovery is not easy, and it's nice that you have a lifeline that you can call anytime. They're very responsive, and so we can't say thank you enough to them.
We did not pay them.
But you're coming to monitor us soon, so just remember that. Okay, what did not work well? At the beginning of this, we did not have a formalized appeals process. And so what we were getting, it seemed like every other day our administrative entities were calling and say, hey, this business really doesn't fit into your guidelines per se, but we think if we just modify this a little bit, we can make it fit. And day after day, it gets confusing. It's hard to track changes, and you don't even remember what you started with. So what we developed is what we call a case review. Once again, simple, it's just a spreadsheet, and they have to tell us, they have to identify the problem, how many businesses are affected by this problem, and what they would like to see the change made to the program. And you'd be surprised, this one sheet makes them do a little work up front, and it has reduced the number of changes requested dramatically. We also had an issue with DOB up front. There wasn't a DOB manual when we started. We were given the Stafford Act and said, go from there. So what we did is we contacted SBA, and we thought that was sufficient up front, just checking with them to verify there was no DOB. We later found out that wasn't, and as you all know, there's a variety of sources you need to check. So going back and doing that is very difficult, so it's important to establish that process up front. And we've really done, I think, a pretty good job of doing that. So if anybody has any questions on that, we'd be happy to address those. And here's my contact information. Feel free to call and visit our website. I think you'll find lots of helpful information there. And now I'll open it up to questions. No?
Yeah, Meredith.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How did you address the OIG finding? Did you have to pay back or?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We explained that our intent was that they had a loan approval, and I think it came down to $250,000, if you remember, Peggy, in the final. About 12 businesses that have to pay back funds. So, yeah, it was significantly reduced. Any other questions? Oh, back there.
How did you handle the streamlined underwriting that you mentioned?
Well, we set it up in our program. So if you look at the equipment programs specifically, what you do there is we establish the need by looking at their pre-flood tax returns and looking at what they had there. And we've added a factor in of 2. So we multiply it by 2, and that's their maximum. And then they bring in their receipts for the equipment, inventory, supplies that they've purchased. And that's how we do the underwriting. So we're not looking at financials and evaluating that and looking at bank statements. It's how we set up our programs. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you go into more detail about how you resolve the issues?
Our process that we have? Absolutely. Oh, sure. You wanted me to go into the duplication of benefits process a little more? So what we do is, like I mentioned, we have a web-based system, and we have a duplication of benefits affidavit where the applicant is required to provide us any sources of funds they've received thus far. We also have a consent and release form, which is important to have because you're going to need that with the insurance companies you contact. And we have a subrogation agreement, so going forward, if they receive any additional assistance, they're required to notify us. Once they have that information along with all their eligibility documentation, they submit it to us by entering a date in the system we have called Service Point. Once we get it, we've developed an IT system called the DUBAP, and what we do there is we contact insurance, any other sources of funds, so if they receive a grant, we contact the grant provider. And we also, after we've done all that, we send it to SBA and receive the final DOB verification. Once we do that, we notify the administrative entity that an award verification has been uploaded to Service Point, and that basically says they're eligible for the award. They can draw funds at any time.
Well, what did you do about retrofitting for those that caused a problem in the first place? How did you go back and revisit those areas?
We worked with the administrative entities to go back and address those, and since it's a federal law, they're required to. So basically what we did is we contacted them by phone and we're nice about it, and then later we said, you actually have to do this or you will need to pay back the funds, and that in general, most cases got people to pay back funds. But also setting up your recapture policy is important, and you'll look at that and decide, what you need to actually go after or what you can write off.
Good morning again. I'm Kathleen Weissenberger from the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs. Our program, as you will hear, I think I have 6 slides, and our program is much more streamlined and simple than the other programs you'll hear about today. And I think one of the reasons that we were asked to present was what we did really was not anything that we wouldn't do in our normal program. We just did it with a little extra money. So it's an extremely simple program that any small entitlement or state grantee, regardless of the size of your award, can do this in your program. We were part of the Midwest floods in 2008, and then we had 2 other declared disasters that year that were then later awarded Ike funds. In 2008, we were expecting over $500 million in business losses. Obviously, everybody knows the economy was already not in great shape in 2008, and so the disasters just exacerbated an already weakened economy. We allocated $22 million. We received just under $500 million total for the 2 different disasters. We allocated $22 million of that. We had a very small downtown revitalization program as part, of economic development, but what I'm going to talk about today is just our job creation. It's all assistance to for-profit business for the, purpose of creating jobs. And it's what we did in our normal day-to-day program anyway, like I said. The program The eligible projects had to be vital to the economic recovery of the disaster-affected area. That's key, because you do need to tie your projects to your Federal Register notice. We had applications come in that we thought were a good fit, but they maybe didn't use the right language, because I'm terrified. We still haven't been visited by the OIG, and I'm terrified. So we made them revise their applications to make sure that we felt like the language was really conveying the effects that the disaster had on their economy and how this was vital to their recovery. It was an ongoing program. We had no application due date. We evaluate on the following things: the importance of that project to post-disaster recovery, how many low to moderate income jobs they're planning to create or retain, the wage of the jobs. We don't have any kind of benchmark. We go county by county what the average wage is, but we clearly are not going to incentivize keeping people in low income positions. So we're looking for jobs that will help them move out of low income. The maximum amount we allowed per job was $20,000. We chose not to request any waivers for economic development because we felt like we wanted to be able to incentivize as many businesses and communities as we could. We wanted to create as many jobs as we could, and therefore we never had any intention of maxing out the per job limits. So far, we've funded 24 local, and we did this all through local unit of government grants. The only thing that the state of Indiana chose to do, I take that back, our housing authority does carry out some activities directly, but the only thing that we chose to do as a direct activity was some planning projects. We did this all, again, like our regular CDBG program, where we made a grant to a local unit of government. So we awarded 24 grants. 16 million of that has been obligated. Of those 24 projects, we were projecting just over 1,000 jobs. We've completed and monitored 11 of those projects already. 592 jobs created, 69.9% LMI, which is 21% higher than the proposed LMI in their application. So we felt pretty good about that. And the average cost per job was around $12,000. We based that on, again, what kind of financial commitment the company was making to the community, what kind of investment they were making in the community, what they were paying those workers, what their actual need was in order to get the project accomplished. And then we went anywhere from $3,000 up to the $20,000 per job is what we ended up funding on each of those. So what worked and what didn't work? For us, it was important to do what we knew how to do. We had 15 times our annual allocation come in, and I was allowed to bring on 2 additional staff. You can't, when you're a state program the size of our program, and you're not allowed to hire 20 people to run that additional $500 million. It's very important that not only for yourselves, that you're doing things that are in, the same process as much as possible, so that your staff knows what they're doing, but so that your local grantees understand. We have a certified grant administrator program in Indiana that we require on every CDBG project. So it was important that we kept things as much, in line with what we did on a regular basis, so people understood that as possible. We funded primarily capital equipment. We didn't have a policy that said that that's what we were going to do, but when we looked at overall project scope and what the needs were, what the community needed to provide for the business, if there was infrastructure, what the company needed in terms of expansion for job creation, if we were able to fund capital equipment, we funded capital equipment, which I'm not going to go into it here, but doesn't really affect your environmental review. You still have to do an environmental review, but it does make that duplication of benefits easier, because when you itemize that budget, if you're paying for a specific piece of equipment, then it's much easier to show that any other funds that were put into the project or received were for separate things. We didn't fund at the highest allowable job amount, which I mentioned earlier was strictly because we wanted to be able to assist as many communities as we could. We had 82 of 92 counties affected, and most of them are rural, low-income communities, and we wanted to make sure that we could assist as many of them as possible. We also knew that sometimes businesses overestimate their job creation. I know you find that shocking, don't you? But we wanted to, our purpose is to help our communities, and so we do everything in our power to make sure that our communities don't get in a position where they have to pay back, because we put all the risk on the local unit of government. We do very minimal underwriting. We look at the business, we look at the financials, not the company financials necessarily. We look at them, but we're basically telling the community, if you're applying to this grant, for this grant from the state because you believe in this company, you've done your own due diligence on this company, and you're going to take the risk. They all know that up front, but we want to work with them. So if a company comes in 20 jobs short, and they just say, we really thought that we were going to be able to hire 100 people, but we're just not sure when we're going to be able to start hiring again. The economy hasn't, come back as quickly as we thought. We want to have some wiggle room so that we can do a modification to the grant agreement, increase the per job amount, lower the number of jobs, and close them out if they met their 51%. And then again, I mentioned we didn't carry out activities directly. All of our economic development projects were made as grants to a local unit of government, and they were made as a grant from the local unit of government to the for-profit business with a job creation agreement in place with, clawback and things like that. But again, we put that responsibility on our local units of government. We only have one in repayment right now, and it is a sad story because, they really thought that this was, it was a hometown person moving back from another state and creating businesses, and it turned out to be a really bad situation, and the money is gone. There is no business. The business owner is, we'll just say, not exactly above board, and unfortunately they're ineligible for all of our programs until they pay the money back. But they were made aware of that up front. So we're helping them make sure they're understanding the processes of going through legal things to get that money back. But we have never written off economic development grants. We, as a matter of course, don't do it, and we don't believe in it. So that community will give us $900,000 back, and until they do, they will be ineligible for CDBG in the state of Indiana. I think, let's see, so what were the challenges? Well, overwhelming demand. We typically put about $1.5 million a year in our economic development program. As I said, we put $22 million in. There was a huge learning curve on our staff because we didn't really do that much economic development, so I typically did all of that myself, and just was not able to do that. So grant administrators that hadn't typically done economic development, communities that hadn't applied for it in the past, staff, in-house that hadn't really dealt with it that much. Then you add in DRGR, and and how do you do that, beneficiaries, and how do you change, and, quarterly reporting, and Grant knows how much I love DRGR, and we love him for his assistance, but it's challenging. But so there was that learning curve for all of the, grantees and the staff, and documentation. Again, it was something that we had always done, but we might have funded 1 or 2 economic development projects a year, and we didn't really do that historically. We often put our economic development money, rolled it back into one of our other programs. So when this money came out, as Meredith alluded to, people want their share. And they don't understand the programs, they don't understand the requirements, they just want us to give them money. So it was trying to get all of that information across to local units of government and to the businesses that were looking for assistance, we started getting calls. Our Economic Development Corporation had never heard of my name. They could care less about us. We were the Office of Rural Affairs. We were, and all of a sudden I was like the most popular person in state government. And everybody knew my name, and everybody wanted a piece of the pie, and they wanted to use the money for things that were maybe not what I would consider CDBG best use of CDBG money. It might have been an excellent economic development thing for the state or that community, but they were hearing things from other states, and then they'd start coming to me saying, I don't know if there's anybody from Michigan here. I can't tell you how many times consultants, those like big economic development consultants that do the relocation for businesses would come to me and say, well, Michigan is offering $5 million. And I was like, well, good for Michigan. I hope that, I hope those people appreciate those jobs, because we're not giving you $5 million. So it was amazing the knowledge that people seemed to think that they had about CDBG and how it worked. So again, that was a challenge. And that's it. Our program, again, was very simple. We did what we knew how to do. We funded businesses to create jobs in our communities that had been affected and were having, had struggling economies to begin with. So that's it. Any questions? I want to leave time because I know Louisiana's got a...
We're early.
Okay. No questions. Okay. Oh, yes.
What were your loans from?
We didn't do loans. Nope, all grant. We didn't. They got the money and they created the jobs, or they didn't. Oh, I'm sorry. Repeat. Yes. Sure. Oh, sorry. When we made a grant to a local unit of government, all of our grant agreements say that if they don't do X, Y, Z, whatever it is, low to moderate area, whatever that national objective and eligible activity is, if they don't do it, they're going to pay the money back. And for economic development, we require, as part of their application, they have to show us what we call a job creation agreement. Some people might call it a contract, some people might call it an MOA, but we require that local unit of government have an executed job creation agreement with the business that basically says the same thing. We have agreed to provide you $500,000 for capital equipment, or in a few instances, we've agreed to run water and sewer from, our main line to your property. In exchange, you will create X number of jobs, 51% will be low to moderate income, and if you don't do it, you pay the money back. And so we require that they have that as part of their application. Yeah.
In your presentation, you listed about 24 projects that you all funded. Could you give us an example of a couple of the projects that you funded?
Tammy. We funded, a lot of them were business expansions in our rural communities that, for one reason or another, were able to bring on an additional product line and hire maybe another shift, like maybe they were going to go to a 3-shift production, but they needed specialized equipment to do it. Or it was a company that was looking to locate in a certain community for whatever reason. Good, we're in the Midwest, so we've got, good access to transportation and things, but maybe there's no water and sewer. And so they said, we'd be interested to move here, but if you can't, local community can't provide us with water and sewer, we obviously can't do it. So most of them were those kinds of expansion. We did a couple, I hesitate to call them attraction projects, but we did a couple projects where a company was looking to develop an entire new facility, and they were looking at some of our communities. And so we, like I said, capital equipment, water, sewer, but they're every kind of business, every product line you can imagine, manufacturing, call centers, things like that. And we have time for one last question. Yes?
You talk about creating a new job.
1 second. I was just wondering, how did Section 3 come to play?
Section 3, well, Section 3 applies to everything that we do. Section 3 is not my favorite topic. I'll admit that right up front. But basically, when they are, Section 3 predominantly is a construction. It only applies to construction. But because you're tracking job creation, if we did construction, then obviously we had to go through our full Section 3 process. Our communities had to go through that full process with their contractors. If we were doing capital equipment, it doesn't technically apply, but you're hiring LMI workers, so you're tracking that low to moderate income, and they are typically from the community. A lot of our communities will add additional clauses that we don't require, but they'll add a clause that says, if we're going to provide you with this grant money, then we want 20% of your hires to come from our community. But it really doesn't, unless it's construction, it's not really relevant.
My name is Adrienne Celestine, and I'm the Economic Development Director for the state of Louisiana. I have Lauren Tishner here with me, and she oversees our economic development programs. Lauren is going to go through a little more detail about the programs that we run, and I'll go through some of the lessons we've learned over the last 6 years. But I would like to make one important point and echo what Meredith said earlier, which is identify your need. The first allocation we received was as a result of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005, and our total allocation was over $13 billion. We allocated $322 million of that to economic development programs. But as you can see from the maps, a large part of our coastal areas, and as most of you know, New Orleans was underwater for several weeks, and a lot of our small businesses were affected. So when we designed programs with our Katrina Rita allocation, we specifically tried to assist small businesses in getting up and running as quickly as we could, and also to assist those small communities that were completely devastated. We also created some programs specifically for certain industries such as tourism, and try to assist with workforce development needs in those areas as well. For Hurricanes Gustav and Ike, we received an additional over $1 billion allocation. As you've heard from some of our other state presenters, the majority of those funds were allocated directly to the parishes to decide what types of projects they wanted to do, and most of them opted to do infrastructure and housing projects. A very small percentage of that went into economic development programs. At the state level, we allocated $232 million for state-run economic development programs. The majority of that, because those storms affected a larger geographic area of our state, were dedicated to specific industries that were affected, such as agriculture and fisheries. We also opted to do some larger projects in some of those areas that were more affected, such as the coastal areas, which received more damage than our northern parishes. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren. She's going to go through some of the details of our program, and then I'll come back up to talk about lessons learned.
Good morning. So after Katrina and Rita, we did a needs assessment internally, and we found that there were a wide variety of sectors that needed that had some economic development needs. So as a result, and due to the lack of capacity that we had internally in the disaster recovery unit, we decided to implement our programs through other state agencies, nonprofits, subrecipient organizations who already had the internal capacity and expertise to run those programs. So one of the programs that we had was the Louisiana Tourism Marketing Initiative, and Louisiana has traditionally had tourism as a central economic industry, and this program is really designed to let outsiders know that Louisiana was still open for business, and that we weren't still underwater, and to try to encourage the rebirth of tourism in Louisiana. The Research, Commercialization, and Educational Enhancement Program, that program was administered through the Board of Regents, which is the higher education division within Louisiana, and they filtered the grant funds down to universities for them to relaunch their research programs that were focused on commercialization of more science and technological areas. The Recovery Workforce Program, we gave the funds to the Louisiana Department of Labor for them to administer, and they filtered the grant funds down to technical and community colleges, and that program was multi-purpose in that it was designed to bring people back to Louisiana, to offer them free training, and then to help place them in critical sectors that were needed for the recovery of Louisiana, such as oil and gas, healthcare, construction, and advanced manufacturing. Then, of course, there were, very immediate business needs, and that's where the bulk of our funds went after Katrina Rita, to the business grant and loan program. The first phase of that ended up being primarily grants, and there were a lot of lessons learned in that first phase, and so we ended up launching a second phase that was structured as 20% grant and 80% loan. And that program, again, we gave the funds to a different state agency, which was the Department of Economic Development, and then they selected local CDFIs to actually make the loans to the businesses. They did all the underwriting, and there were standard loan criteria for all of those loans. They were 0% for the first 2 years and 4% thereafter, with a max of 7 years. They had to demonstrate an actual loss following the storms, whether it was revenue or asset loss. And it was designed for businesses who had a minimum of $25,000 gross revenue pre-storm, and they had to be in existence before the storm. And one of the different kind of components with this program was that we designated all of those subrecipients as 105 A15s, so they were actually able to retain the program income that was generated from those loans and turn those into a revolving loan fund. We did put some parameters on that revolving loan fund in terms of putting a cap on how much they could spend on admin dollars, and they had to make the loans within the hurricane-affected parishes. So we are still monitoring them on the revolving capital fund as well. With Gustav and Ike, we set it up a little bit differently. We continued the model in some cases of giving the loans to, the grants to other state agencies, and then they would administer the grants. So the Agriculture Assistance Program, that was modeled almost identically after the BRGL Phase 2, the small business Phase 2 from Katrina Rita. But that was actually administered directly by the Department of Agriculture with heavy technical assistance from our division to help with the underwriting on those loans. The fisheries recovery programs, our Department of Wildlife and Fisheries administered that program, and they gave grants to fishermen who had experienced losses during Gustav and Ike. The Project-Based Recovery Opportunity Program has been our attempt at a more traditional economic development gap financing program. We're administering that one in-house. It's larger awards. They range from $500,000 to $5 million. And we do a thorough credit analysis. They're individualized terms for each loan, and that's designed to kind of spawn economic development in those underserved areas. And so these are some of the examples of our projects where we did the underwriting. The Joy Theaters on Canal Street. New Orleans had a thriving theater district pre-storm, and the Joy Theater after the storm had standing water in it for around 6 weeks, and they just finished that. They opened that up for New Year's this year. The St. Thomas Community Health Center, our major public health provider in New Orleans was the Charity Hospital, and that was destroyed in Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and as a result there was a lack of public health options in Louisiana or in New Orleans, and a lot of the federally qualified health centers experienced a huge influx in demand for their services. So this center, they were in existence before the storms, and then they were able to expand and eliminate this blight at the same time and create jobs as well. And the New Orleans Healing Center, this was one of our more different projects. This one includes a food co-op inside. It's also in a highly underserved area. There's a food co-op, there's a community yoga center, there's a community garden, a bookstore, cafe. It's kind of an all-purpose community catalyst. So I'm going to turn it over to Adrian for the lessons learned.
Okay. As you can tell from some of the programs that we did, unlike Indiana, we did not keep things simple. So my first lesson was identify and address needs, which I've already covered. But as part of that, if you want to do something that is non-traditional, seek assistance from your HUD representative. Earl can tell you we called him all the time, asking questions about what we can and cannot do if it seemed like it was out of the box. And as he told us on more than one occasion, you guys are ahead of the 8 ball. You know, you're doing something that's never been done before. So he usually had to bring it up the chain. But ask if you want to do something, if you see a need out there and you think that it's necessary for the recovery, go ahead and ask if it's something that could be eligible. You might be surprised. Second lesson, evaluate your target industry and sector. We do not have expertise on every industry in the state, and knowing that there was a need, as Lauren said, we partnered with a lot of other state agencies who were more familiar with the industries and could assist us with developing programs that would actually target the need and meet the needs of that industry. We also did a lot of community outreach meetings to get the public's feedback on what they felt was the need, the economic development need in their different areas. Assess capacity, internal and external. We discovered in the beginning of our programs that some of our requirements dictated that we needed more staff that was trained on CDBG regulations, as well as our compliance needs. We made sure that we staffed up accordingly and began to train our staff more effectively on compliance and our program regulations. This also kind of ties into consider experience and past performance and project selection. What we found with especially with the nonprofit intermediaries that we had administering some of our programs, those that did not have experience previously in achieving the objectives of our program, such as lending or underwriting, those were the ones that had the most problems with compliance issues. So if you have some organizations that are experienced in what you want them to do already, that goes a long way in getting you where you need to be and achieving your timelines for your program. If you have organizations that need to staff up or need to train their staff on just the basics of your program guidelines, it's going to take you a lot longer to get your program up and running and to meet your guidelines. Okay, I'm going to move quick. Consider monitoring and data collection requirements. For every requirement you have for your program, you will need to have supporting documentation to prove that. And we learned that from the auditors, OIG, our state auditors. If you say it's a requirement, you must have documentation to show that the applicants meet that requirement. And you have to have a monitoring plan for every requirement that you have as well. Think through and document processes and procedures. I can't stress this one enough. Before you launch your program, think through who will evaluate your proposals, who will review them for eligibility, what the process will be once a project or a program is approved, what your invoicing procedures will be, how many people need to touch your invoice, what supporting documentation you need, have all your checklists in place. It goes a long way in doing it before you launch. Even if it delays the launch of your project somewhat, it's much better to do it on the front end than to try to scramble and do it once you have people already waiting for the funds. Maintain open and consistent communication. For our programs that involved more than one subrecipient, we typically conducted weekly calls with all of those subrecipients. It helped us to assess any issues that they were facing with applications or some of our requirements. It helped answer, we had a forum to answer all questions at one time. We also, as a caveat to that, also established for the second phase of our grant and loan program an exceptions process where if an applicant did not meet our traditional requirements, a way for them to submit an exception request so that we can approve it on a case-by-case basis. Ensure all deliverables and requirements are contained in written agreements. This was key, especially on our larger projects. We detail all of the we include all CDBG requirements, all the deliverables that we expect, including job creation requirements, any job completion requirements. Another point I want to make here is try to secure your agency's position as much as possible. On the larger projects, you will more than likely have to take a subordinated position, and we understand that, but sometimes people assume just because these are public funds that you don't require any collateral, you don't require any guarantees, and you can secure your position as much as you can. We require completion guarantees. We require that they have proper insurance. So just make sure that you think through all of those things when you are evaluating or putting together your agreements, your loan agreements, or your contracts. Document, document, document. That's the first lesson we learned from Earl. Thank you, Earl. He always told us, make sure your files tell a story. And that's what we strive to do in our programs. We try to make sure that if anyone comes in, an auditor, a new employee, they can look at a file and be able to tell the story of how a decision was made and any communication we've had with that applicant.